Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics and the founder of Football Outsiders. And today we have a very special guest. It's Evan Silva, the fantasy football legend and the co-founder of Establish the Run. If you haven't checked out the premium content at establishtheRun.com, I don't know what you've been doing. We also have Corey March with us, our head of business development at SIS and the king of all things fantasy at SIS. And our producer, of course, the versatile Justin Stein, holding it all together. We heard your feedback coming into Off the Charts at sportsinfosolutions.com. And Aaron is trying out a new mic this week. So hopefully we continue to get better with your help. Aaron, how are you sounding?
You tell me, how am I sounding? Hopefully I'm sounding better.
All right. And also with us, as I mentioned before, Evan Silva. Evan, thank you so much for coming on. What is up, man?
Yeah, man. It's cool to be it's cool to talk with you guys because I've been listening to your guys' show really since you started it religiously. Really haven't missed, I don't even think a single episode. It's awesome. Getting Aaron Schatz on a podcast, that was an exciting development. Corey, you've been crushing it with sending me some information, some data each week. Last week, some awesome statistics on how Russell Wilson has crushed against man coverage and how Tyler Lockett and the Steelers play a ton of man coverage. And how Tyler Lockett had been crushing against man coverage. Tyler Lockett scores like 18 PPR points, sets career highs in targets and catches. And Russell Wilson was the number 4 overall fantasy quarterback on the week. So Sports Info Solutions doing some great and have some great nuggets this week on Kyler Murray and Christian Kirk that really excited about. But it's awesome to talk to Aaron Schatz, the absolute godfather. And I met Aaron Schatz in 2013 at the Sports Analytics Conference at MIT. I don't even know if you remember, Aaron.
I do remember meeting. Absolutely. There was a dinner. There was like a dinner at one point or something.
Yeah, and it was a blast just to get to pick your mind. I mean, you talked to me for like 3 hours, and that was awesome. You were like, "Oh, you're the IDP guy, right?" And I was like, "No, man, I'm not the IDP guy." But that'll always kind of stick out of my mind, man. You were super gracious, and I really appreciated that.
Well, thanks, man, and thanks for the words of compliment. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, with all of the kind words floating around, and for any listeners, if you're ever thinking about going to any of these events like Sloan or going down to the Senior Bowl, anything like this, you'd be surprised at how accessible different people are, and that you can start conversations with people like Aaron and Evan.
Yeah, actually, I'll throw one in. They're doing a conference at Wharton Business School in Philadelphia on November 8th, I believe, and I'm speaking at that. So if folks want to come meet me, I'll be at that in Philadelphia, November 8th.
Yeah, come visit, see Aaron there. You can see me and Alex Vigderman. We'll be up at NESSIS at the end of this month. So come by these things, start a conversation. We're all surprisingly approachable, even the Godfather. But let's get into it now, and let's talk about Evan alluded to some of the things Corey's been sending his way for the matchup breakdown column. And this week, we got to talk fantasy because we've got Evan on, and we've got to talk about the fantasy ramifications from all of the different backup quarterbacks that we expect to see this week. So let's just start talking about it. Let's run down the list. And I'm not just interested in hearing from you guys what you think we can expect from these guys as players, but also how is this going to affect the running backs, the wide receivers on their teams? And starting right at the top, everybody's favorite guy to discuss, Corey. What can you tell us about what we can expect from Daniel Jones this week?
Our man, Danny Dimes. I want to say that I coined that. I was the first one to hear anybody say that, but it's become very popular. I didn't get it out there in the open. I maybe missed my opportunity on that one, but very, very exciting. I mean, the Giants, this is kind of an overdue move going into the season. If they wanted to play the most competitive football that they could, I think this is the way to go. He looked great in the preseason. From what I saw from him in college, he looked good. The overall numbers weren't as flashy as I think the player himself on tape and what he showed in the preseason. But I think we could be in store for some fireworks and some interesting things out of Daniel Jones. And from a fantasy perspective, I think maybe a slight bump to the offense, maybe an overall more cautious approach offensively as they ease him into the scene there. So we could see more touches for Saquon Barkley, which I think is good for the team overall and definitely good for fantasy. And we could see a higher ceiling for guys like Sterling Shepard and Evan Ingram if they're getting better quarterback play.
I would tend to not jump to conclusions too strongly about the preseason. I know everybody's really excited, and he looked much better than Eli Manning in training camp. So it wasn't just the preseason games, it was the training camp as well. But I just, there's really no correlation between preseason statistics and in-season statistics. And I think we have to go into it with the idea that this is still a young rookie quarterback, and he's going to play like a rookie quarterback. And Eli Manning wasn't that bad through 2 weeks. He was slightly below average, but I don't think they're pulling Eli Manning because Eli Manning has been bad. I think they're pulling Eli Manning because the team has been bad, and so they might as well find out what they have with the rookie.
Evan, what was your reaction to this one? What do you think we can expect from Daniel Jones?
Yeah, I mean, I've wanted this since day one. First of all, there's been this kind of narrative popularized by, I think, Mike Francesa over the last 5 years that the reason that Eli Manning has struggled is because his offensive line was bad. And while his offensive line was not good, he was also the type of quarterback that made his offensive line look worse. And Daniel Jones has athleticism, and I think that immediately injects some life into the pocket for the Giants. And I also think that he's going to be more aggressive taking shots downfield because you can't get a whole lot less aggressive than Eli Manning in that department. I think that the first guy that could really benefit from this is Evan Ingram, who has an average depth of target right now. This is one of the most athletic tight ends in the NFL, has an 100th percentile speed score. Evan Ingram runs like 4.4 flat at 235. He has an average depth of target right now of 6. You look at Will Dissly has an average depth of target of 9.4. Greg Olsen is up at 10. Delaney Walker is at 9, 36-year-old Delaney Walker. George Kittle at 8. Zach Ertz at 8. Evan Ingram down at 6. I think if we can get him up into like the 8 or 9 range in terms of his average depth of target, I think we will see more big plays from Evan Ingram.
It'll be interesting because I think to an extent we'll find out how much of this is Eli versus how much of it is the Giants' offensive philosophy. And I love the point you make about Daniel Jones' athleticism because I think people fell into this trap with Josh Allen that we saw this kind of tall white guy and assumed that he was just going to be, firing pocket passes all day long. And lo and behold, if you watch him in college, you watch him in the NFL, he's a running guy. And when, we're talking about the fantasy impact, those running quarterbacks are always going to have an outsized impact. I think that Daniel Jones is going to be a similar guy. Over 50 carries his senior year at Duke, over 100 carries his junior year. This is a guy that is athletic, and he's played behind bad offensive lines before. He had bad offensive lines at Duke. Some of the research guys here at SIS were talking about it. This is a guy that had pressure on over 80% of his dropbacks, I think. Not pressure on 80%. He had a high percentage of pressure and an 80% three-step drop or fewer in college. So he was getting the ball out quickly by scheme because they didn't have that offensive line. So even if the Giants have that struggle up front, I think you're right. This will look different than it's looked with Eli Manning. All right, let's take another step forward. Let's keep it around here in New York and talk about Luke Falk. What can we expect from Luke Falk stepping in there for the third string with the Jets? Aaron, what do you got there?
Fade everybody. I mean, were you playing a lot of Jets anyway? Probably weren't playing a lot of Jets anyway, but fade everybody. I mean, third string quarterback who just came off the couch 2 weeks ago is really not a promising figure.
Any reason for optimism?
I mean, from the time Luke Falk came in the game, I was looking at the target share and where he was throwing the ball. Le'Veon led the team in targets with 8. I think he had 10 on the game or something like that, and he had a ton in week 1 too. So he's been getting fed the ball in the air. So I think we'll see that continue. Luke Falk doesn't seem like the guy who's going to be pushing the ball downfield. So I think those underneath targets are going to really pile up.
Probably more fade Robbie Anderson, I guess.
Yeah, adding to the Saquon value, potentially adding there to the Le'Veon value with Luke Falk. And I think anytime Adam Gase is going to look to throw to running backs, anytime he can throw short of the first down marker, he's going to try to do that. Anything to add there, Evan?
Yeah, just check down after check down. So maybe Jamison Crowder will be able to, pile up a bunch of real short targets in comeback mode against the Patriots this week. And, you hope like Le'Veon Bell gets 10 targets, again. But yeah, I mean, it's generally fade everyone because you look at their team total. They have a team total. The Jets have a team total this week of 10.5. Now, I think that if you're going to try to be a forward thinker, the Jets have the bye coming up in week 4. And then Sam Darnold sounds like he's confident that he's going to be back in week 5. And then they get Chris Herndon back in week 6. And Chris Herndon has a chance to be kind of a difference maker, I think. He had one of the most impressive rookie seasons from a tight end in the last decade last year. And during the preseason, it was all 11 personnel, and he was the one tight end, and he was not coming off the field. And that's actually how they've used Ryan Griffin. So I think that Chris Herndon just immediately jumps right back into that role. I think that, it feels like the Jets season is already over, and, to some extent, maybe it might be, but I think that I wouldn't write them off offensively. Their schedule also lightens up quite a bit.
Really, really easy.
Yes. It goes from because I remember in terms of SOS, their overall schedule was pretty easy, but it was kind of brutal in the first 6 or 7 games, and then it just becomes really, really soft in the second half of the season. So you definitely bench Robbie Anderson this week, but I think that this offense has a chance to kind of finish strong. And I actually like the idea of stashing Ty Montgomery, because right now what they're doing with Le'Veon Bell is he's running into 30 car crashes a game.
Mm-hmm.
The defenses are gearing up to stop him. He's getting hit by multiple defenders on all these plays, and he already had an MRI on his shoulder, and he averaged 4 missed games per season when he played, 5 years for the Steelers. So, in a deeper bench league, I like just keeping Ty Montgomery on the bench, because he'll be the next man up for this offense that I think has a chance to kind of, finish up pretty strong.
The Jets right now, by our Dave ratings, the average rating of their remaining opponents, it's the easiest schedule in the league. And that includes the Patriots twice and the Cowboys. Once we get past week 7, the Jets' schedule over the second half of the season, and by that point Sam Darnold will be back, gets really easy.
Love it. Love it.
All right, I'm on the other side of that one. I'm not buying any of this Jets love right now. Sorry, guys. Let's take it down and let's go down to New Orleans and talk about Teddy Bridgewater, who we expect to be the starting quarterback, although Sean Payton hasn't officially named him the starter down there. Corey, what can we expect from the offense down there with Teddy at the helm? You think of him being a lower average depth of target guy. Is that what we can expect?
I don't have a real sense that much is going to change from how the offense is operating. Drew Brees was a low depth of target guy too. Before he went out, I think he had 1 deep ball prior to the hand injury. So it's not like they were really exploring the deeper parts of the field. And I think that's similar to what we'll get with Teddy Bridgewater. So overall, I expect to see the offense operate similarly, but maybe a less effective version of it. I know when Teddy Bridgewater was in there last week, we saw a ton of targets still go to Michael Thomas.
There was nobody else on the field.
I think the biggest change that you're likely to see is more sacks, because he doesn't, get the ball out as quickly as Brees does. Brees is so good at avoiding sacks. That's something that just doesn't really have heavy fantasy ramifications.
Evan, what do you make of Teddy?
Well, we really haven't seen him play well a whole lot recently. In our most recent exposures to him, he really has not. He's kind of struggled to move the ball. So that's a concern. I think that Sean Payton not coming out and being willing to confidently name him the starter also sent up a little bit of a red flag. I mean, he's seeing the same stuff that we've been seeing. And Taysom Hill played 21 offensive snaps last week. Is he going to be playing 30 offensive snaps going forward? Are they going to use a quarterback rotation? That is kind of on the table. And Taysom Hill is really not an accurate passer. He's like a running quarterback, right? So that is going to hurt. I mean, it's just going to be a situation where I think you got to kind of downgrade the outlook for Alvin Kamara a little bit. and Michael Thomas is kind of left as the only man standing beyond Alvin Kamara. Jared Cook has been terrible early on, like both in real life and fantasy. And I think they're going to struggle to get the ball downfield to Ted Ginn, and Traquan Smith is already hurt.
Yeah, lots of injuries there. And to your point, I think with kind of the ambiguity going on, I could see a scenario where Teddy Bridgewater throws for 300 yards, and I could see a scenario where Taysom Hill is playing in the fourth quarter. So I don't think we have a very good idea of what to expect there.
I could see a scenario where Taysom Hill is playing a lot of the snaps when they get into the red zone.
Yeah,
right.
That's a really good point.
Yep, fantasy ramifications there for sure. You love what he brings to the table, kind of with that wildcatish type stuff, but he can actually throw the ball. Another guy that had a really good preseason, however much stock you want to put into that. All right, coming back to Pittsburgh, Mason Rudolph. We got to see a little bit of him, but now it looks like it's going to be the Mason Rudolph show with Big Ben out. I think the really interesting here, talking about James Washington, I think everybody's made the point that they had quite a good connection together at Oklahoma State, those two. Mason Rudolph, Corey, what can we expect from him? What's kind of the breakdown on Mason overall?
You mentioned Mason and James Washington. I'll plug Establish the Run and Evan's running mate over there, Adam Levitan, his famous shower narrative, referencing two guys playing together in college who showered together and developed chemistry that way.
Why did you just put showered in air quotes?
I really don't know. Who knows what goes on? But yeah, funny stuff from Establish the Run.
Hey, they've certainly developed a level of trust together. There's no doubt about that.
So yeah, circling back to Mason Rudolph, I think for me, I think he's the backup in the league with the most upside. Looking at his college numbers, he was very aggressive throwing the ball downfield, did it accurately. Those are two things that I love to see out of a quarterback, especially when they try and make a leap and be a starter in the NFL. So I think we could see something. I think we could see some impressive play from Mason Rudolph. It's a little early to tell. He looked okay week one. I think getting thrust into the game, it's always hard. But now, being the quarterback one through a week of practice, I think we'll start to see the best from him.
Roethlisberger was really bad in the first 2 weeks, and I don't think that if he was healthy, he would continue to play that badly. So Rudolph may not be an upgrade over what Roethlisberger would be for the rest of the year, but he's an upgrade on what Roethlisberger has been through the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, Evan, what's your take?
So I think that this is pretty an interesting situation. The team total on the Steelers this week is like 18.5. The game total is like 43.5 in Steelers 49ers. And I think that we might be sleeping on Mason Rudolph as like a pretty good player. The Steelers, first of all, have shown a lot of faith in him. They traded away Josh Dobbs. They reportedly had a first-round grade on him coming out of college. I don't know if that's factual. But when he was in college at Oklahoma State, he elevated the play of James Washington and Marcel Aitman, and he led the nation in yards gained on 20-plus yard downfield passes. I love the comparison that Daniel Jeremiah made of him to Nick Foles, to where he's not a super athletic guy. He's kind of got like heavy feet in the pocket. And sometimes I worry that maybe he's on the bad end of that spectrum. Like Tom Savage and Nick Foles are kind of on the same spectrum, but Nick Foles is on the good end of the spectrum, and like Tom Savage is on the bad end of the spectrum. And I think that Mason Rudolph is going to end up being somewhere on that spectrum, hopefully closer to Nick Foles. Now, Tom Savage never had good protection, and the Steelers have all 5 of their starters on the offensive line back from last year, and they can protect the passer. Last week against Seattle, Mason Rudolph had some pretty clean pockets. He was willing to throw down the football field and target, James Washington and Juju Smith-Schuster down the football field, and that was that aligned with what we saw from him in college. And I just think the Steelers have shown a lot of confidence in him. Not only did they trade Josh Dobbs, but a day later after losing Ben Roethlisberger for the season, they trade their 2020 first-round pick, which conceivably, when you lose your starting quarterback, you're like, oh man, we might be drafting the top 5 next year. They're like, no, we're going to trade our first round pick to the Dolphins for a defensive back. And now, look, teams are not perfect, but the Steelers are typically better at this than other teams. I just think that, there's something to be said for all the confidence that the Steelers organization, a pretty good front office over the years, has shown in Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, colossal risk there, obviously making that trade, and everybody's got their opinion on that. Whereas, if that ends up being a high pick, it'll be a bad move. But if Mason Rudolph ends up carrying them to the playoffs this year, if they end up finding a way to put things together, I think they got themselves a really good player. I love the point that you make comparing Mason Rudolph to Nick Foles. It's kind of the immobile spread quarterback, guys that can play in those kind of spread systems where you're doing a lot of zone read, RPO type stuff. Making those quick read decisions and having that be how you fit into the offense, as opposed to being, your Kyler Murray type of spread quarterback, which is not what you necessarily need in that system. Another guy who's played in a lot of spread is Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew, we got to see him with his first start last week, but we're going to see a little bit more of him through the next, until I think week 11. What do you guys make of Gardner Minshew? Aaron, what's your take there?
Who likes short passes? I like short passes. Gardner Minshew really likes short passes. I actually prefer long passes, but Gardner Minshew likes short passes. He has a average depth of target, it looks like 6.1, which is the lowest in the NFL outside of the Jets. The lowest average depth of target is Darnold and Falk, and then Minshew would be the second lowest. So, but it's interesting, in the DVOA, early DVOA, Chris Conley and DJ Chark are both in the top 3 for wide receivers. So Chark's had pretty good fantasy numbers early on.
Interesting. Evan, what do you make of Gardner Minshew? What can we expect there from the Jaguars?
Yeah, the low ADOT passing, I thought immediately would translate to success for D.D. Westbrook. And Gardner Minshew actually has targeted D.D. Westbrook the most among all the Jaguars pass catchers so far, but D.D. Westbrook just played terribly last week. Had a drop, lost a catch due to his own offensive pass interference. I think that ultimately D.D. Westbrook still makes the most sense to be on the high end of receiving distribution from Gardner Minshew, but so far it's been Conley and Chark. So it's and those are like the outside perimeter, big time speed players. And so that just doesn't make sense so far, but it's what's happened so far. I'm expecting more receiving work for Leonard Fournette. And I mean, last week he played a career high 97% of the Jaguars offensive snaps. So he is a true every down back. And I think that, if Gardner Minshew continues to keep throwing short, then I think that ends up benefiting Fournette and D.D. Westbrook to some extent. And I think that we might, kind of write off Chark and Conley in a few weeks as kind of, small sample kind of flukes.
Interesting. I think you're probably right playing the percentages there. The only chance with those guys is if they're running so much of this kind of mesh stuff and you're just getting these guys on all kinds of shallow crosses. I haven't looked into the film on that one, but it could be what's going on there. Corey, what can you tell us about Gardner Minshew?
Not much to add that hasn't already been said. Aaron mentioned Luke Falk, a low ADOT guy too. Him and Minshew both out of that pass-happy, short throw, spread offense in Washington State. So we've seen that translate over with those two guys. Minshew's been really accurate. That makes sense since he's been throwing the ball really short. Accurate on 49 out of 58 throws, which is the second highest on-target rate in the league so far behind Dak Prescott, who's been great and now gets to play the Dolphins without Minkah Fitzpatrick this week.
All right, one more guy that we want to talking about all these different backup quarterbacks. It looks like it's going to be Kyle Allen playing for the Panthers this week. Aaron, what do you have for us on Kyle Allen, and how can we expect him to fit in there?
Well, Kyle Allen was fabulous in a single start at the end of last season, although New Orleans wasn't, they played a lot of their starters on defense in that game, but Cam Jordan, I think, sat for a lot of that game. But obviously, you're going to see a lot less running from Kyle Allen than you would from Cam Newton, although Newton hasn't run the first couple of weeks of this season. I think it's sort of similar to what I said about Roethlisberger, which is we would expect Cam Newton to play better over the long term than he has in the first 2 weeks of the season. But he's been so bad in the first 2 weeks of the season that Kyle Allen would be an upgrade on what we've seen so far from Cam Newton. I think I saw a stat somewhere saying that compared to, the NFL Next Gen stats, expected completion percentage, that Cam Newton is the furthest below expected completion percentage so far this year. So you got to figure that Allen, even as a backup quarterback, is going to be better than that.
He's been throwing a lot of balls at receivers' feet, Newton, so far. Yeah, I'll chime in. We've been doing a lot of talk about depth of target, which I think is a good stat to really focus on when you're talking about going from a starter to a backup quarterback. You'd normally expect starting quarterbacks to be more aggressive throwing the ball downfield. That's why they're the starter. In this case, Kyle Allen, in the limited work he got last year, was actually throwing the ball downfield a lot. 8.5 average yard per attempt last year on 31 attempts. Newton, 7.1 dating back to the beginning of last year. Newton hasn't thrown a touchdown this year, I think is the fact there. They have some good weapons on offense. Curtis Samuel's been the most targeted receiver on deep balls so far this year, and I think I saw that he's among the leaders in separation among wide receivers according to Next Gen. So we could see some good things coming from Kyle Allen in that offense. Like Aaron said, Newton kind of keeps the offense honest with his rushing ability, but we haven't seen that at all this year.
Evan, what's your take?
Yeah, Cam Newton, when he is not running the ball, is not an effective NFL quarterback. And, you can even go back and look at like his number of rushing attempts really correlate to even with how well he performs as a passer. I mean, it's almost like it gets him into the game, like he runs for a first down, he signals first down and, like it motivates him. He's very much like an emotional on-field player. And I think that, when you take the running away from him, he's not going to beat you, as a passer, unfortunately. And I mean, I don't think that he's like necessarily a bad passer, like some make him out to be, but I think that he's definitely not as good of a passer when he is not running the football, and the stats bear that out. He's played with like 9 years. They also correlate, his rushing numbers correlate to wins. And this is not a situation where when a team rushes for 100 yards, they're 17-1, over their last 18 or whatever. This situation just independent to this player in terms of quarterback runs, that means something to this player. And so I think that, I was saying it like right after that Bucs game. I mean, he was awful in that game, man. He was awful in that game. And if he's not going to run, you may as well just play Kyle Allen or Will Grier. Aaron mentioned it. Kyle Allen was really sharp in Week 17 last year. He beat out Will Grier by playing better in the preseason. He was originally a 5-star high school recruit into college, bounced around colleges, wound up going undrafted. But he got the ball to Curtis Samuel in particular last year. He targeted Curtis Samuel 5 times. Completed 3 for 81 yards and a touchdown. I think Curtis Samuel could blow up this week against Arizona. I really love that game in general. I like the over on that game and because I think that these offenses are both going to perform better than we think. They're also the 2 fastest paced offenses in the NFL. I like that game in general, and I think that people are going to kind of ignore it from a sports betting standpoint and also from a daily fantasy standpoint.
Yeah, you could see definitely some people winning some big contests based on that game. I want to dive in a little bit deeper on the point you're making on Cam Newton in terms of from a football perspective, what's going on there with that correlation with running. And I think what happens is that Cam Newton is just not a good enough passer to beat a team that can sit back in quarters or can sit back in their Tampa 2 against him and play that effectively. You can't play those coverages against Brady because he's going to kill you every time. But I think if you play those against Cam Newton, you're usually going to win. Whereas when he's running, he's forcing you to bring that extra guy down into the box to account for him as a runner, right? He's an extra player for the offense that gets involved in the running game. You have to bring that extra guy down to account for it. And then all of a sudden, he can dictate your coverages. And when he gets a lot of that, single high man stuff, I think that's when he can be more effective, and he has been more effective throughout his career. You take away that element of his game, and it becomes, a situation where you've got him on the goal line and you're literally bringing him out of the play so he doesn't even touch the ball and hand it to McCaffrey. You're doing the direct snap there. You can see how that would be a problem for the run game, for the pass game, and for really the entire team, just because he doesn't have that ability as a pure drop back guy. All right. Before we move ahead, Evan, I want to give you a chance to give us some of the takeaways. You write the famous matchup breakdown column every week, breaking down all the biggest fantasy matchups across the league. We've talked about a bunch of these different quarterbacks. Are there any big thoughts that you have that we can find from your matchup breakdowns this week?
Well, I would definitely go. I mentioned the statistic that Corey passed along regarding Kyler Murray and Christian Kirk, and I don't want to give that away, because I mean that's like really kind of valuable data. But I would definitely go look for that. I think that just in terms of off the top of my head, like it's going to be interesting to see how this Eagles offense functions. One of the things that I really liked about minus Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson and Dallas Goedert, one of the things I really liked about the Eagles entering the season was that they had so much depth. And really, like, it was almost like they had two offenses. And, with the exception of and they had to lose Nick Foles. But, I mean, they were so deep at receiver. Their friggin' left tackle that they traded up for wasn't even starting. They had the best number 2 tight end in the league, and now they are down to their second team because of all their losses. So, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, how is he going to perform? He didn't play real well last week, 4 yards on 4 targets. But he did play 90% of the Eagles' offensive snaps. Matt Collins has always been a kind of interesting player to me. He's big. He can run pretty well. He's been a really good special teams player. I liked him coming out of UNC. He's 6'4", 221, and he got 8 targets last week, and he had a ton of air yards. And he actually is going to play that Deshaun Jackson role. He's the direct backup for Deshaun Jackson, whereas Arcega-Whiteside is the direct backup for Alshon. And then we're going to have Aguilar in the slot. Aguilar had a big game last week, but of course dropped that what really would have been the game-winning touchdown against Atlanta. And his confidence kind of wavers at times. He's got a lot of talent, but his confidence comes and goes. The biggest beneficiary was Zach Ertz, who coming into the season I was a little bit down on, because they had so many weapons. That kind of played out. That came to fruition in week 1. But then they lost all the guys that, I was worried about bringing Ertz's target projection down. He gets 16 targets, and then he's now number 1 among all NFL tight ends in air yards. So Zach Ertz looks like a guy who could blow up against Detroit. And then on the other side, Corey also passed along some great statistics regarding Kenny Golladay. And the Eagles secondary, and Matthew Stafford theoretically should be in for a big game. The Eagles really have struggled over the last, since really the beginning of the 2018 season, to cover tight ends as well. That could bode well for a bounce-back game for T.J. Hawkinson, who was obviously a monster in week 1 and a ghost in week 2.
Interesting stuff there. All that stuff with the Eagles especially. I thought that was a bizarre game they had against the Falcons. I can't remember seeing a team that had as much depth as they had coming into the season, to your point. And I also can't remember seeing a team have their depth tested so much so early. Let's take a quick break, and then we will come back in to officially discuss the most important games of the week. Sports Info Solutions is excited to announce the launch of its public-facing site, SISDataHub.com. The new SIS Data Hub is free for all to use and features player pages and some of the most detailed information available. In addition to all of the standard statistics, here you'll find proprietary data collected by SIS Video Scouts, like on-target percentage for quarterbacks, directional yards per carry for running backs, and pressure rates for edge rushers. You'll also find advanced metrics calculated from all of that advanced data, like independent quarterback rating, total points earned, and total points saved, which are detailed on the glossary on the site. A pro version of the Data Hub is also available, which contains everything from the free version, as well as filters to split by situation, personnel, and almost anything else imaginable. The Data Hub Pro also includes team leaderboards, NCAA data, and the ability to download all data as CSV files. You can visit the free Data Hub at sisdatahub.com today, or you can register for a free trial of the Data Hub Pro at pro.sisdatahub.com. Coming right back in, we are down a Corey, but we've still got Aaron and Evan here to give their insights. So a special little fantasy treat as we get through the most important games of the week here. Aaron, without further ado, what is the most important game of the week for playoff odds?
The most important game of the week for playoff odds is Houston at the LA Football Clippers. Houston, 58% of the time, they're in the playoffs with a win, 33% with a loss. The Chargers are in 67% of the time with a win, 42% of the time with a loss.
Yeah, and a really interesting matchup here. I think the Chargers, I thought, really had a rough go of it last week. A tough game for them. Not really sure what's going on, what to make of what to expect to them moving in forward. So clearly here, a high leverage game here with these two teams. Evan, what did you make of this matchup?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting one and certainly a high leverage one, as you guys discussed. I think the Chargers are favored by like 5 or 6, which I thought was kind of interesting. They don't really have a home field advantage. That's just tough for any NFL team. Like they've got to have the smallest fan base in the NFL, and their home field advantage is just negligible.
Have we done? Has people done research on that? Because my feeling is that there's just not enough sample to be able to say objectively that the Chargers have a smaller home field advantage. I know that subjectively we all feel like that should be the case.
It's subjective, and I shouldn't say it like a statement of fact. It is definitely subjective, but it's also kind of intuitive. But
it makes logical sense. There's no question about it. I mean, if home field advantage is primarily caused by the subconscious effect on the referees of the crowd in Los Angeles is rooting for the other team. Although I don't know if the Texans travel quite as well as like the Philadelphia Eagles or the Green Bay Packers.
Right. That goes back to the book Scorecasting, which is a really interesting book that everyone should read. Man, I just don't have I just looked it up. The Chargers are favored by 3. So I think that the sports bookmakers are considering them pretty even teams. I think that makes sense. Deshaun Watson in his career, whereas Cam Newton, who we discussed earlier, has been better statistically when he has played with a lead. Deshaun Watson in the NFL has been better when he has played from behind. So that's like a little bit of a factor from a fantasy standpoint here. Casey Hayward kind of got worked a little bit by Kenny Golladay, and he didn't have the greatest season last year. So can he lock down DeAndre Hopkins? I'm not sure. I think that Will Fuller is kind of starting to get due to rip some really big plays. He's made a couple, but a couple they've just missed on a couple. And then on the Chargers side, they lost Derwin James obviously a while ago, and then they lost his backup, Adrian Phillips. How is that going to affect them? The Chargers have played soft boxes, fewer than 8 defenders at one of the highest rates in the league. And the Texans Bill O'Brien has really fallen in love with Carlos Hyde, who, to his credit, Carlos Hyde has run the ball really well. But do they get caught up in trying to pound the ball down the Chargers' throats in all these light boxes? And I think that could maybe kind of come back to haunt them because I think that they're going to have to score points out in LA because their defense just isn't that great. I don't think the Texans' defense is that great.
I think that our overarching numbers here, based on preseason projections, would favor the Chargers, but there are a lot of matchups that do favor Houston. Not only, no Derwin James and no Adrian Phillips, but both number 2 and number 3 cornerbacks are out for the Chargers, Trevor Williams and Michael Davis. And the Chargers weren't even very good versus number 1 wide receivers. Last year, they were 23rd in DVOA versus number 1 wide receivers. So far this year, they're 25th. So Casey Hayward, like you say, is not likely to lock down Hopkins. They're missing their other top cornerbacks. They're missing their safeties. And, oh, by the way, DeAndre Hopkins so far this year has, I believe, the highest depth of target of any quarterback, highest average depth of target. And the Chargers were in last place in DVOA on deep passes last year. So like a lot of the matchups point towards Houston going deep, big fantasy numbers that would mean for Watson and also probably for like Will Fuller, and that would be a real problem for the Chargers.
And it should be. My worry is that Bill O'Brien gets caught up in trying to put the ball in Carlos Hyde's belly so much, you know?
Right. And then the other problem is pressure. Houston is dead last in pressure rate allowed so far this year by the SIS numbers. And the thing is, right, you've got Laramie Tunsil now, but when you go up against the Chargers, you have to have good tackles on both sides because you've got both Ingram and Bosa, and they do not have good tackles on both sides because they have Chantrell Henderson on the other side.
Yeah, that Texans offensive line still definitely questionable there. I wanted to come back to an interesting split going back to the Chargers and how they play at home. In 2018, Phillip Rivers, on passing plays involving Phillip Rivers, the Chargers had 48 expected points added. That was 8th in the NFL for quarterbacks at home last year. But in terms of points earned, he was all the way up at 4th. He had 78 points earned on those same home attempts. So what that tells you is that he was outpacing the EPA by 30 points, which tells you that his teammates were down about 30 points from what the EPA was. So this home effect seems to be Phil Rivers is still playing really well. The offense still does okay, but it's not doing everything that it should be doing because the other pieces aren't holding up their end of the bargain.
I'm betting a lot of that is the offensive line. That would be my guess.
I think you'd be making a lot of money on that one. If only betting were that easy, right, Evan?
We'd all be millionaires like Aaron.
The Chargers, yeah, I wish. The Chargers are 29th in pressure rate allowed this year. So this is a game that promises a lot of pass pressure on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, hard to have a lot of faith in either of those teams. Let's take a look around the league and go to our next most important game of the week. I think Evan teased this one a little bit earlier.
Yeah, Detroit at Philadelphia. Detroit, they make the playoffs 55% of the time with a win, 32% with a loss. Philadelphia, 58% with a win, 35% with a loss. I know we still have Detroit higher than almost anyone else in our projections, but part of that issue is that Philadelphia has to compete with the super strong-looking Dallas Cowboys, and Detroit does not. I'll tell you what looks interesting to me in this one. So far this year, the Eagles have been massive against the run. They are second against the run so far this year, but only 23rd against the pass, while the Lions have been 8th passing the ball, but 28th running the ball.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up another kind of interesting stat. This one was actually given to me by Bryce Rossler, a researcher, and it came from a conversation that he and Noah Gatzik and I were having, talking about the Eagles and talking about Carson Wentz. I think there was this kind of narrative that everybody got really familiar with that was how good the Eagles were on third down in 2017 and how historically good Carson Wentz was that year. What might have been going on there is that this might be a Carson Wentz thing, but it might actually be a Frank Reich thing. Because when we look ahead and we follow Frank Reich from that number one ranking in EPA-based success rate, positive percent in 2017 for the Eagles, in 2018, the Colts are number one with Andrew Luck as their quarterback at 52% success rate there, first in the league. And then in 2019, so far, the Colts are up at 59%, which so far this season is fourth in the league. So at what seemed at the time to be a real Wentz trait, it's actually looking like it might seem to be a Frank Reich trait that's going with these offenses. Likewise, scripted plays versus unscripted plays. We looked at that similarly. Frank Reich, really, really good on on scripted pass plays. 0.11 expected points added per play in 2017 with the Eagles, then comes over to the Colts, 15 expected points added, and then 2019 so far, 26 per 100 plays. So we're talking about really, really good success on the scripted plays and the EPA on third downs when we look at what we thought was a Carson Wentz thing. But as we start to kind of move forward into time, it might actually be a Frank Reich thing.
Yeah, interesting. You know, Aaron brought up the kind of just DVOA, straight off the DVOA, strengths and weaknesses of these teams, and especially from an Eagles defensive versus Lions offense matchup standpoint. So put yourself in the shoes of Matt Patricia and Darrell Bevell. You know, Darrell Bevell, your history is run first. You know, Matt Patricia has this super run-heavy mantra that he's trying to instill in Detroit. But he also is facing this Eagles defense that is good at stopping the run and horrible at stopping the pass. So, are we going to be game plan specific and be opponent specific in the way that we attack this defense, or are we going to stick with stubbornly stick with our run first mantra heading into Philadelphia and stub our toes like the entire game? And so I think it'll be really interesting to see, did they adjust to account for the weaknesses of their opponent? They absolutely need to. Matthew Stafford, Kenny Galladay, Marvin Jones, TJ Hawkinson, Danny Amendola, you have the guns, you have the horses to put a lot of points on the Eagles.
Bill Belichick would attack the opponent's weakness, but it's shocking how much the children of Belichick do not tend to actually coach like Belichick.
Yeah.
Right. We'd love to be able to trust that they would do what seems to be obvious. But I got to say, I love the Eagles in this one, playing at home against there. Even with all the injuries, it seems to me like there's a lot more to trust in terms of looking at what they do and the way that they seem to generate their schemes rather than the kind of the same old stubbing your toes, as Evan called it. All right, one more matchup to talk about, and that is the most important game for Super Bowl odds. I don't think this will be a big surprise. What do you got here, Aaron?
Oh, no. Game of the week is absolutely Baltimore at Kansas City. Baltimore goes to the Super Bowl 20% of the time if they win, 11% if they lose. Kansas City goes to the Super Bowl 25% if they win, 15% if they lose. I actually had a little bit of a debate with Jeff Schwartz over Twitter this week about whether the Ravens count in the AFC. Is the AFC a 2-team race or a 3-team race? And if the Ravens want to prove that it's a 3-team race, they could prove it by winning this game in Kansas City.
A pretty interesting game. So one of the first things that I always look at just assessing these games from a fantasy standpoint is the totals. And the Chiefs-Ravens opened at 51.5, and then it got smashed up to 56. And then it's kind of dropped back down to 53 and 54 in some spots. So definitely some disagreement among, people that have a lot of skin in the game as to how this game might go. The Chiefs historically under Andy Reid, when at home, have been a 65% under team. You bet the under when Andy Reid is at home. And I'm a Lamar Jackson fan, just all in. I've liked him from day one. I thought they should have started him week one last year and let him take his lumps all season. But he has really come out like gangbusters. He has also had the absolute best possible schedule in weeks 1 and 2 in Miami against a taking team. Lamar is from 35 miles away from he was born 35 miles away from Sun Life Stadium. And then week 2, going back home to face a Cardinals team that was coming off an overtime game from across the country, play at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, and just not a good defense there either. So the schedule is set up perfectly for him. Now he goes to face Kansas City, and their points allowed numbers have also been really, really strong, even as they've had their defense has deteriorated in recent years. Kansas City's, their points allowed has been really, really strong at Arrowhead. So this is a difficult environment. The Chiefs have played pretty good defense early in the year. They have allowed the 10th fewest points in the NFL. Of course, they really have not played stellar offenses so far. So it's going to be a test of, the number 1 and the number 4 scoring offenses in the NFL going up, but in very different situations than what they experienced in the first 2 games.
Yeah, I follow you completely there. I can't wait to watch this game. The Baltimore-Arizona game was fun enough to watch with the 2 quarterbacks that we had in this one, with Lamar Jackson and Pat Mahomes going up against each other in this one. And they're not just those quarterbacks, but the offenses and how intelligently these 2 teams are doing things. The way the Chiefs are using space and just, okay, next man up when Tyreek Hill goes out, and it's unbelievable what Pat Mahomes does. And then looking at the Baltimore system with all the 13 personnel, doing all the play action stuff that they're doing, and then getting the deep stuff involved too, and really tailoring the offense around Lamar Jackson. I love watching both of these teams, but I do think that you're right, that this could be a come and crash down to earth moment for Lamar Jackson. Week 1 was against Miami. That's against, a AAA team, I think is being kind to talk about what was going on there. And in this last game, the numbers were big, but it wasn't like he was throwing the ball all over the place. He was running the ball more than I really would have expected, especially in a game where I don't know if they needed him to run as much. And you saw some runs, the designed runs in between the tackles, which I think at some point they're going to want to get that stuff out of the offense. Just seeing the way Andrew Luck and Cam Newton and guys are going to break at that position. I don't like the idea of getting my quarterback tackled by defensive linemen. I'm a little more okay with him being tackled by DBs, trying to get out of bounds more. So I'm concerned about that, and I don't think the sort of offense where you're asking him to really run all that much, it's tough to think that they're going to keep pace with Pat Mahomes in Arrowhead. A big wild card being that Spagnuolo defense that hasn't been tested yet.
I'll tell you, if anybody can slow down Mahomes, it's going to be the Ravens because they bring so much pressure. I mean, Mahomes is good against pressure, but he's better without it. And the Ravens are number 1 in pressure rate so far this year. They're number 1 in ESPN's pass rush win rate. Also, Matt Judon has been hot early. So the Ravens really need to bring the pressure in this game.
All right. Well, on that note, we will take one more quick break.
Hi, I'm Corey March of Sports Info Solutions, and I'm here to tell you about SISBets.com. SISBets.com is an advanced prop betting information tool powered by Sports Info Solutions. Now you can leverage our proven projections model to find value against the odds. You're never more than a few clicks away from knowing which pitcher may surpass his strikeout prop, or whether your favorite running back projects to go over his rushing yards total. Just choose the type of bet, the player, and enter the money line to see the SIS Bets recommendation. That's SISBets.com.
We want to thank all of our listeners for tuning into the Off the Charts podcast. As a reminder, check out Evan Silva's EstablishTheRun.com. He and Adam Levitan have put together the most fantastic research for any sort of fantasy, DFS, gambling that you're going to do. You heard Evan on the podcast. You heard the amount of information that he has and the kind of level that he's thinking about this on that I think is unrivaled really out there in the industry. Evan, anything you want to add to that?
No, I'd just like to say, thanks so much. This was a great opportunity. And, every time I listen to you guys, it gets me thinking about something that I hadn't previously thought about, and that's what I'm looking for in a podcast. I'm not looking for, a bunch of, stats that I hadn't, or that I've already kind of knew about. I like how you guys talk about concepts and talk about explanations behind the statistics. And so keep up the great work. And thanks again for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on. To all of the listeners, please help spread the word about the Off the Charts podcast by subscribing, rating, and writing reviews. You can hit us up on Twitter, and now Sports Info Solutions is also on Instagram at Sports Info Solutions. So check out on Twitter. You can obviously find me. You can find Aaron. You can find Evan. But now we're also on Instagram there too at Sports Info Solutions. For our guests, Evan Silva and Corey March, my co-host Aaron Schatz, and our producer Justin Stein, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.